Hello, everybody, and welcome to the channel. My name is Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor and a spiritual seeker. And today I want to talk to you about a really cool experience I had recently where I caught up to and was able to walk several hours with Robin Greenfield, an environmental activist. But you don't have to know who he is in order for you to find this video valuable. I just want to share some of the things that I have learned from him over the years, a little bit about our talk, and then what it has been inspiring in me in the last week or so since I was able to walk with him. I have some different tools and tips and experiments, simple things that you can sort of try as you're inspired to live a little bit more ethically with yourself, with each other, and with the environment. So take a listen. So I started to follow Robin Greenfield like 8 years ago on YouTube. Basically, I was in a minimalistic phase. I don't know if you'd say phase. I have been drawn to minimalism for a while, and there's moments in which I kind of do a little bit more research and work on it a little bit more. And with minimalism can come sometimes a care for the environment, and Robin Greenfield came up. And he has done all sorts of cool things in the past. He's lived in a tiny house. He's lived off the grid. He spent a year where the only thing he ate was what he could forage or what he grew. And in the process of all of this, he has advocated for a more sustainable way for us to be able to live with the planet. And all of his experiments, which are meant to sort of, draw attention to the environment and to our relationship with it, have been things that he has really educated himself about a lot. So he's very thoughtfully and intentionally jumped into some of these experiments and projects that he's done, and then he's shared them with the world to inspire people to do what they can do. Now, I'm not going to live in a tiny house off the grid. I'm not going to probably do many of the things that he did, but there's no judgment or shame in what he does, and I don't want to bring that forward either. We are where we are, and I think the goal is to just mindfully and intentionally think about what works for us right now to live in better harmony with each other and with the earth, because I think that's really, really important. And so let me talk a little bit more about what I discovered on our walk. So I found out that Robin was doing this really cool experiment where he was walking from Canada down to LA by foot the whole time, often barefoot. And everything he owned could be reduced to this little cart that he was pushing. And I was curious about this. He was doing it not just necessarily for like sustainability, environmental things, although his connection to the earth and camping out in nature was definitely like going to be connecting with the earth. But he was doing it also to connect with people, which is why he was going on the highway instead of like on the Pacific Coast Trail. But also along the way, he was hoping that he was going to work through some of his own internal stuff, kind of get that inner truth, his own sense of integrity and ego, and just have that stuff come up so he could work through it. And lo and behold, I happened to have a spiritual retreat with my girlfriend out in California. And when I looked at the time I was going to be out there and where he was going to be, I couldn't believe that it was going to match up. And so I was out there for 5 days, and on the last day, my girlfriend, God bless her, drove me out to where he was going to be, and we found him. She dropped me off, and I proceeded to walk with Robin and another friend who had just happened to pop by and was curious about who this guy was. And the three of us walked for about 2.5 hours to the little town of Jenner. And along the way, we talked about many things. Obviously, I asked Robin why he was doing this and what his plan was when he got to LA. But there were other little things that we talked about, like, what is grace? And for me, grace is when you accept someone exactly as they are without trying to change them. And we talked about non-judgment. I talked about how one of my life goals is to be non-judgmental. When I'm greeting a person or going into a situation, that I'm not coming in with a million judgments of if someone's right or wrong or who they are or anything, but that I'm just so much more curious and open. And so we talked a little bit about our inner goals, about truth and honesty and living with deep integrity. And we both had this idea that we want to connect more with people and the earth in our own ways. He's obviously an activist, and I'm living in a house and I have a car and much more of a conventional way of living. And his is a very unconventional way of living. And yet I think we had some similar goals in how we want this world to be. But along with that, I was very curious because he says that people have wondered if he's crazy and if they've kind of accused him of being crazy, especially with this walk. And it was really interesting because kind of what I've always understood is that sanity, when I see someone who I believe is really sane, it's usually someone who's very curious. They're open to new ideas and new people. They do not live based on fear, but they live based off of joy and an openness. They're curious and compassionate. Their heart and their mind are free and open. People who I think are sane are creators of their own reality, but in a very grounded way. Whereas people that I've seen as being more crazy, and I'm only using that because that was a term that was thrown on him, are people who live based out of fear. They live based out of fear and they're stuck and trapped in a story that maybe they didn't even choose, that somehow has them, and they're not open to new people and new ideas and new ways of seeing things. In fact, they can be very, very threatened by that. And their mind and their heart are often closed off to other people and to new ways of thinking and seeing. So with that in mind, I found Robin to be one of the most sane people I have ever met. And one of the things that he talked about was nonviolent communication and speaking from feelings in a completely open and non-judgmental way. And he demonstrated that. It was this really powerful moment at the end of our walk when we were waiting for the person who was going to pick them up. And we were kind of sitting around, my friend and Adam and Robin and I. And Robin just brought up kind of an elephant in the room. And I honestly was so surprised because most people don't talk that way. And if people do bring up the elephant in the room, it can often be very accusatory or shaming. You know, something like, "You're in a bad mood. Why are you in a bad mood?" Yeah, that's going to end in a good conversation right there. But rather, he brought it up in such a curious, non-judgmental, open way that it allowed me to think a little harder about my participation in the conversation that we'd had and to notice what he was talking about. It allowed me to be more honest, and I actually, thought harder than I normally would have if someone had just sort of said something and had taken me back. And overall, I just sort of felt like he was a very gentle, open, calm, safe person. And really just had this vibe to him that is very rare and unusual because so many people that we meet are living on fear. They're very defensive, sometimes very offensive, and just are sort of stuck in this is the way the world has to be. And they can still be a wonderful person, and I know I've been that way at times. But I know that for me personally, I want to live in a way that's more intentional, that's more truthful and honest and compassionate and gentle and calm with all living things. I can't control what the world does, but I can control what I do and my place in the world. And so in this time of reflection, I decided I was writing down things that our conversation inspired in terms of experiments that I wanted to do. I'm not going to live in a tiny house or only eat what I forage and grow. And I love the idea of walking huge distances, but I'm not going to do that anytime soon, nor barefoot. But here's some things that I did think about. So I have two categories, and one is basically how do we reduce our reliance on capitalistic structures that really honestly harm the earth, they harm people, they harm us. And the other is how do we find more connection and more harmony with ourselves and with other people and with the world. Those are the things that are really, really important. And I want to say before I jump into this that yes, I recognize that for some of these experiments, it takes a level of privilege, time, money, and resources in order to switch your your money and your investment from one place to another place is not something everybody has. For example, there are people who live in food deserts, and the idea of going to an organic co-op just doesn't even make sense. It's not something that's even available to them, let alone would they have the money to be able to buy there often. I get it. So with all of these things, I want us to think about what is actually feasible for you, and does what I'm saying make something bounce off a new idea that you have that's more realistic for you. And I also want to talk about the reality that no, I do not think it's up to only just the individual to change their behaviors when you have corporations who are doing and have done untold damage to the environment for generations. So that is another talk of the activism we could do to get corporations to make more sustainable changes. But it's twofold, because we do have 8 billion people on the planet. And if more and more people take responsibility for what they can, for what works for them in their own life, we can have way better habits that are more sustainable. And that's part of the whole thing, is that our capitalistic society has convinced us of a few things. It's told us that we're all only responsible for ourselves, that sort of rugged individualism. We're often then, when we feel bad about ourselves or the world, then we're told to buy stuff and to consume more. And we're also believe that this is a meritocracy, where basically, you're only succeeding based off of your own hard work and ability. And none of those things are true. And they have created, for us in the United States in particular, a culture in which we're consuming at a rate that is unsustainable for the planet. If everybody on this planet was consuming at the rate that people in the United States did, this planet would just be trashed instantly and our resources would be gone. So there is something to us taking, when we can, as we can, responsibility for our own habits. And experiments can be really good for that. So let's jump into what those experiments are. So for this first category, I have 10 ideas. And this is how we can reduce consumption and be more ethical. The first one, I love this idea. It's, yes, buy less clothing. Okay, buy less clothing in general, and buy, if you can, more natural, sustainable, and ethical brands. That's the second one. But back to the first one. When you buy less clothes, if there's something you want, write it down and wait 30 days. And if you still want it after 30 days, then you can buy it. When I have done this in the past, and I've definitely done months that are no spend, I've written down everything I've been tempted to buy. And after I've gotten to the end of the 30 days, I realized a vast majority of what I wrote down I actually didn't want anymore. But some things I did. And so that just sort of proved that it was filling a need that I had. And that brings me to the third thing. You can pick 30 days where you don't spend anything except obviously groceries and gas and your bills. But if you have anything extra, clothing or books or fun little nights out, I mean, even imagine that some of the lunch dates you might have with girlfriends, what could you do instead that wouldn't cost any spending? And so that's just a way to be more mindful of where you spend your money, how you spend your money, and how quickly you're just going to spend your money. Then there's the possibility of just learning to sew, even just a little bit. You don't need a sewing machine, but just to learn basic things of how to mend tears and rips in clothing. And I think that's a really cool idea. Like, I can do this really in a small way, but I want to get better at it, especially patching or mending socks in a way where I don't just throw things away when they get a hole in them, but maybe they could last a little bit longer, which just naturally over time means that I'm reducing what I'm buying. And with this, there can be the experiment to try a capsule wardrobe for 30 days or even a full season. A capsule wardrobe is basically where you take a selection of clothing that's not your full wardrobe, and you can move all those other clothes somewhere else. You don't have to get rid of them. And you just wear those clothes for a month or a season. And part of the reason for doing that is just to notice how that feels. I mean, if you absolutely hate it after 30 days, you never have to do it again. But a lot of people find that forcing themselves into experiments like this Allow them to just rethink what they've taken for granted. A lot of people realize that they only wear certain clothes over and over anyway, and that they've been holding on to clothes for reasons they don't know. And so it gives them the permission slip to get rid of what they don't need. Another experiment that's often done is maybe over a period of a month, you go through your house and you get a box from each area of the house, each room of the house, and you put stuff in it. You fill it up and you get rid of it. Obviously, you don't want to force yourself to fill up a box and put in things that you actually need or use or like, but it's just an idea. You might have one room that's 2 boxes full of stuff and another room that's 0, but it just gives you something to think about. And then, of course, trying to reduce garbage and trying to reduce plastic. I'm not going to go into all of this, but I have learned that not all plastic, even if it says recyclable, is recycled, not just by consumers and people, because I see a lot of garbage on the sides of the road, but in general, companies don't always know how to recycle it. So just reducing the amount of plastic we bring into our home can be a huge thing. And that could be anything from when you go shopping for yes, food, but also for clothing, for presents. Bring along a reusable bag instead of getting a plastic bag or a paper bag from the store that you're going to. Anytime single-use plastic is involved, see if you can choose an alternative. People even bring, and I remember this every once in a while, people have brought Tupperware with them to restaurants for their leftovers. I don't always remember that, but I have done that. Some people have brought their own silverware wrapped in a napkin when they go to a fast food place or something so they don't have to use a plastic fork. And then, of course, you can switch to buying food, if possible, from more local places like co-ops or these kind of vegetable places. I forget the names of them, where you sign up and they give you a box of fresh vegetables. Eating more seasonally and just trying to spend more locally in general. It doesn't have to be 100% of the time, but if you can do a little bit more of putting your dollars in that way, that can have a huge impact on the way you're contributing to the food industry. And then the last two, number 9, if it's possible, walk and bike if it's just a couple miles away. We have a grocery store that's just about a half a mile away. The route there is made entirely for cars. It drives me crazy. There is not a direct route if you are on footpath. So my husband and I, when we go there, end up jaywalking a lot because the most direct route there on foot, there is no path for a person to be. But c'est la vie, we still do it now and then because it really isn't that far away. And finally, reuse and repurpose old items if possible, and see if other people can do them as well. All of these things I'm mentioning could almost be their own video. So I'm just like throwing things out. You can do more research if there's something I said that really grabs your attention. But like, it's fun to just think about it and wonder what is doable that I could do. And we're all different. So finally, the last category is connection with living beings. The first one is to get to know the local trees in your neighborhood. And by that I mean, do we know which one is an ash tree or a maple tree? Are there different kinds of maple trees? Do we have a cottonwood? Like, what are the different kinds of evergreens? I would love to be able to walk through my neighborhood and be able to look at the trees and know exactly what their names are. And with that, I want to be able to find, I'm not going to live foraging. However, I'd love to know if there were 3 to 5 plants that walking around my neighborhood that I knew were edible. It's just something about that of knowing what's going on in your land. This can also be with getting to know your native plants, knowing what naturally grew in the area before any person ever lived here. And with that can be making a butterfly and bee friendly yard. So there's been a lot of conversation about moving away from just having a green lawn that often takes a lot of chemicals for people to be able to maintain, and instead slowly turning it into more native plants and grasses. Now, I will say my husband has been working on this for several years. It has taken a lot of time, money, and investment in order to be able to do it. So this idea that you just stop mowing and magically you're going to have native plants spring up is not true. It does take some time and education and effort, But even in just little parts of your yard, it's worth it because you know that you're creating an ecosystem that is healthier and maintaining plants and butterflies, bees and butterflies, which we need in order to have pollination. And they just deserve to live as well. Which also reminds me that the next thing is to stop spraying chemicals on your lawn. I think there was a whole couple generations that grew up with this idea of what a beautiful lawn looks like. A well-maintained lawn with zero weeds and this nice low grass that has been perfectly cut. And while that can look aesthetically pleasing, it often takes a lot of chemicals and pulling away of weeds that the bees and butterflies need in order for us to have the yard that we think looks aesthetically pleasing. So now if we think about not just what's good for us, but what's good for the animals and the insects and the trees and the plants in our yard, that's a completely different way of thinking about how you're going to do your yard. And then in terms of connection with other human beings, I love the idea that instead of just buying everything yourself, like your lawnmower, your snowblower, and tools, to see if there aren't items that you could at least share and trade with another neighbor. It's a great way to get to know your neighbor better, but it also can be a great way to buy less and share and have a relationship with them. And 7, practicing non-judgment and nonviolent communication. I am going to buy the book that Robin recommends on nonviolent communication, and I'm really excited to see how that can help to change the way that I talk with people, but also just making it a practice, a spiritual practice to think about how I think about other people so that I can take responsibility for that fact, that if I want to be non-judgmental and more gracious, to notice in the way that I think about other people. And then finally, the idea I had was there are ways to do community building that make us feel less lonely and help us to understand other people better, so we're less prone to misinformation and that stuff that divides us, which is a huge, huge force right now in our country. And those can be things like block parties. They could be a street potluck gathering, but also in my community, at least, we have something called iftar meals, where at the end of Ramadan, a lot of Muslim mosques will open up an evening for the community to come in, and they will share about their faith, and there will be a wonderful meal that is shared together. And I've done this for many, many years, and it's one of many kinds of community building activities where you get to know about the neighbors that live in your city and neighborhood a lot better, and that helps to promote harmony and peace. So that was a lot of stuff that I threw out at you. And again, what I want to say is this isn't about judgment or shame or feeling bad that we're living a certain way and we should be a certain other way, but rather just talking about how our culture in general has not been very good at promoting how we can live in harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the world. And so just trying little experiments here and there, even if they fail, you learn something. You learn about what's hard in our culture, what's easy in our culture, and it just gives you more information to live a more intentional life. So I hope this was helpful, and until next time, bye-bye.